Archaeology is most often defined as the study of humans in the past, and we do that through finding the things that they left behind. And oftentimes we have to excavate to find those things. But archaeology is more than just excavation. There's a long process and many steps in it that get us to a full understanding of what happened here in Williamsburg in the past. And in this video, we're going to take you through those different steps to show you how we do what we do here at Colonial Williamsburg. Archaeology allows us to find and understand the stories of all the people that were here in Williamsburg. So certain documents and certain sources of information may neglect certain people, certain sectors of our community. However, archaeology finds all the things. It's in the ground. We have to look at it, we have to find it, and we have to understand it.
The most important early step in defining the archaeological process is to identify what questions we're trying to answer. So what are the questions that are going to guide our excavation and later our analysis when we get back into the lab? It's essential that we start that early in the process because those questions help to determine where we dig and how we dig on an archaeological site. A quick example, on the John Custis site, we are examining an early 18th century garden, and we want to know what types of plants were there, what types of plants were being grown by John Custis. In order to get an answer to that question, we have to be certain to collect the right soil samples so that later in the lab we can interpret those and hopefully pull out pollen and seeds and other botanical evidence that will help us to identify those plants. Our questions about the site aren't the only ones that matter, and so particularly as we have begun to approach sites where there's an identifiable descendant community or other invested parties, we have begun to approach those groups early in our planning phases to find out what their questions, concerns, ideas are surrounding that site. And we want to weave those in at an early stage of the process so that what we emerge from as we complete the project is a roadmap that answers everyone's questions and addresses all of the concerns for the site.
The first step in conducting fieldwork is running remote sensing scans. One example of that is ground penetrating radar, which will allow us to survey a site without disturbing it at that time. And that will help us identify areas that we will want to put excavation units on top of in the future. The next step of fieldwork is conducting a shovel test pit survey. That is where we will dig a small excavation unit on a standard interval across the entire site. That will allow us to generate artifact concentration maps and identify certain areas or artifacts that have dense concentrations that we can put excavation units on top of in the future. The next step that we do after we conduct the shovel test pit survey and our remote sensings is then conducting open surveys. We will use that information to open up large excavation blocks on top of features, artifact concentrations, or remote sensing anomalies that we want to better understand. The final step is doing site documentation. We excavate stratigraphically, and we need to make sure that while we are doing a science that is very destructive, we record all of that information in incredible detail. So we use surveying equipment, we draw maps, and we use detailed site photography so that we can understand where we have excavated in the past, and future archaeologists can refer to that material. We also keep every artifact we find. Even if it is a modern artifact that we are not concerned with now, we want to make sure that we are not disturbing anything that future archaeologists might be concerned with.
When artifacts come to us from the field, they're covered in dirt. So our first step here is to wash them with a toothbrush and some sink water to get all of the dirt off. We actually don't wash metals like iron nails. They actually get cleaned at our conservation department. When they're all washed, they get rebagged and look like this and travel to my desk where I am in charge of cataloging them and putting them into our collections database. All of the data that I'm collecting from each of the artifacts can be collected in our collections database, and we can analyze that statistically and use it in research projects like the Colonial Williamsburg Research Project in front of me. And we can learn more about the people working and living on the sites that we're studying.
This part of the archaeological process involves doing testing on particular artifacts and samples in order to understand important things about the past and the sites that we're looking at. A lot of times we draw on methods developed by scientists in other fields in order to apply them to archaeological materials. This can tell us important things about how old our sites are, what sort of things people were eating at the sites, or just what the environment was like in the past. For example, this soil sample contains pollen from the 18th century. We can use laboratory techniques to extract the pollen and examine it under the microscope to understand what sorts of plants were growing around the site in the past. This can tell us important information about crops that were growing at the site, what sort of gardens would look like, or just what the environment was like in the past. We can always also examine plaster in order to understand what sort of recipes were used to create these sorts of building materials so that we can reconstruct the buildings as accurately as possible.
Data analysis and interpretation is an important step in the archaeological process because it's the point where we bring everything together. We look at the information that's been found in the field, in the lab, through our historic research, and we piece it all together to tell a complete story about the site. If we skip this step, it would be like having a box of puzzle pieces that we never put together. All of the bits of information that we collect prior to this are important, but they don't really mean anything on their own. During this step, we put all of that information together and we're able to tell a more complete story of the site. So an example is that during the Bray School excavation, we found a set of 2 square pits that through comparing them to other similar features at other sites, we were able to figure out were actually part of a 2-seater privy or outhouse. And now that we know that, we're able to look at all of the artifacts and do soil samples and really learn about what kind of furniture was in the house at the time. What were the children eating at the school? What kind of pollen was in the air when the privies were filled? So all of this information we're able to bring together and tell a story about the school, which is really what archaeology is all about.
Curation and conservation work hand in hand to ensure the longevity of a collection. A curated collection and its associated documentation should be readily identifiable and available so that we can ensure access to our remarkable material. As the conservator of a collection with over 60 million artifacts, I cannot physically interact with each piece. Instead, I can help create and implement best practice policies that ensure stability through things like environmental policies, light level research, and an understanding of protective housing. The primary work that happens in this lab is the cleaning, stabilizing, and protecting of artifacts. We need to make sure material is available to researchers now and in the future so that we can always come back and ask new questions. As conservators, we're also some of the first people to interact with materials, typically cleaning them at high magnification, so that we reveal new details and information about artifacts. We work to support the research goals of projects while ensuring the long-term preservation of our material.
This is the most important step in the archaeological process at Colonial Williamsburg because it's how we share our work with you. And we have a deep bench of experts who we can rely on throughout the process. We work with historians and tradespeople to ensure that our reconstructions and restorations are as accurate as they can be. And we work with our museum staff to contextualize all the discoveries that we're making in the field. And pretty soon, you'll be able to see the entire process at work at the new Campbell Archaeology Center. And so it's really exhibitions, reconstructions, and restorations that help us share everything that we do with you, and it makes it the best part of our job.
So if we've done all right, if we've taken all the steps that you've just seen, then we will have information that people can use in the future. So archaeology is looking at the past, but also thinking about what questions people might want to ask in the future and recording so much information so that it's never lost and that someone can come back and ask new questions, different questions with new techniques that we might not have at our disposal today. So the process is always ongoing and we're always thinking towards the future.